predictions. We'll have analysis coming up. First, the government is expanding the mandate of the Clean Energy Finance Corporation, enabling it to invest in carbon capture and storage, indicating coal will remain a part of Australia's energy mix into the future. The Energy Minister addressed CEDA's State of the Nation conference in Canberra today in the wake of that announcement. And I spoke with Josh Frydenberg ahead of the speech. Josh Frydenberg, really appreciate you joining us this evening. Just to start with, big announcement yesterday in terms of enabling the CEFC to invest in carbon capture storage. Just to start with, why choose now to invest in this technology?
Well, there is already ongoing investment by the federal government in carbon capture and storage, but as a result of a political fix back in 2011, the then Gillard government and the Bob Brown-led Greens party agreed that they would prohibit the Clean Energy Finance Corporation from investing in nuclear technology as well as in carbon capture and storage. This is despite the fact that both the International Energy Agency and the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change say that you need carbon capture and storage to help meet the Paris targets. Now, we've also seen strong support for CCS from Australia's chief scientists, from the CSIRO, and since our announcement yesterday, from major employers like BHP, BlueScope, Shell, the Business Council of Australia, and many others who've supported the government's technology-neutral approach to allow carbon capture and storage be used to reduce emissions, not just from coal and gas-fired power generation, but also from energy-intensive industrial processes that are used, for example, for cement making, for steel making, for chemical production.
There's, as you say, some broad support for it, but how proven exactly is this technology? Because speaking to some people, there are some question marks over issues such as storage as well as the commercial viability of it.
There are 17 large-scale projects currently underway around the world, and in fact I visited one just a few weeks ago in Texas in the United States. It was a coal-fired power station. It was a 240 megawatt unit, and as a result of carbon capture and storage in that case, it was reducing emissions by 40%. So it does work. Governments like the Obama administration in Canada, their governments have invested in carbon capture and storage, and Australia has the real potential to be a world leader in this regard and ensure that we maintain support in Australia and jobs in Australia in these industrial processes as well as in gas and in coal, while at the same time reducing our carbon footprint.
But what about the cost of it? As I mentioned, a lot of people suggest the jury is still out over the commercial viability of it because of the sheer cost.
Well, it's always important to compare apples with apples. And if you compare renewable energy with storage against carbon capture and storage and a gas-fired power station, for example, or a high-efficiency, low-emission coal-fired power station, it's actually very competitive. And the benefit that you get from thermal generation is that it's base load, it's provided 24/7, and it's not intermittent as we know and as we've seen. In South Australia, for example, when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine, power's not being generated, and that creates real problems for the stability of the grid. So I think it can play a very important role with thermal generation, but as I said, it's not just confined to thermal generation. It also plays an important role with industrial processes, and that's why our announcement has been well received by groups like BlueScope Steel.
Can I ask, why announce this this week? Why not wait until the Finkel report?
Well, the Finkel report's looking at a range of issues, and Alan Finkel himself has been on the record many times supporting carbon capture and storage as a proven technology. What the Finkel report will be doing is providing a blueprint for energy security for the system, and that will mean ensuring that we don't have another blackout like we saw in South Australia, and that we get the right mix of energy generation going forward. And carbon capture and storage is a fundamental part of that story, but it's just one part of it. As there is no single reason for the challenges that we face in the energy market today. There is no single answer to those challenges. So carbon capture storage is just one part, but Alan Finkel, I'm sure, will provide many of the other parts when he releases his report next Friday.
And how seriously will the government take the recommendations? Because you could probably imagine there is some scepticism, considering you've already ruled out the likes of an emission intensity scheme, regardless of whether or not that's in fact one of the recommendations in the report.
Well, Alan Finkel is a very distinguished person in our community. He's an engineer. He was selected by the COAG energy ministers to produce this report, and it's important to understand it's not a report to the federal government, it's a report to COAG, so it's all the state governments as well as the chief ministers, and that underlines how the energy grid, energy policy in this country is not the single domain of the federal government. In fact, there's shared responsibilities, and if we're going to get buy-in to an improved market going forward, we do need the states and the federal government to be on the same page, and that's why we'll all watch very closely as to what Dr. Finkel recommends next Friday.
As you say, obviously remaking the national energy market is a huge issue, and it's certainly in the minds of industry one that is a major priority. But getting the buy-in from states, which is going to be crucial to that, how confident are you in actually being able to achieve that? Because to be fair, in the past there have been issues in that regard.
Look, you're absolutely right. We have achieved some significant successes through the COAG Energy Council when it comes to reforms in the gas market, and particularly the transportation of gas along pipelines, and we're improving the liquidity and the transparency of those processes, which will reduce costs. We've run into some obstacles in reining in the network costs, the poles and wires, and agreeing on reforms to the limited merits review process. And we've also run into obstacles in creating a national system, as a number of the states have decided to establish their own renewable energy targets, and my strong preference is to have a single national system so we don't see a duplication or we don't see inefficiencies across state and federal boundaries. So that's what's important going forward. I'm confident that my colleagues who sit around that energy ministers table, like the leaders, the Prime Minister and his premiers and chief ministers, will also understand the critical importance of putting forward a roadmap which will see a more affordable energy system, a more secure energy system, and one that transitions to a lower emissions future.
So you're confident being able to get New South Wales and Victorian governments to overturn the moratorium when it comes to coal seam gas? Because many see that as crucial when looking at the long-term supply side of energy into the East Coast.
Well, you've put your finger on a critically important issue, and we as a federal government have no constitutional powers to overturn those state moratoriums, but we have strongly called for those reforms, and we have actually even put money in the most recent budget to get more work done on the resources that lie within those state boundaries, so that there is more of an incentive to develop both the conventional and the unconventional gas resources. One of the reasons we've seen much higher electricity prices is because of the higher gas prices, and those gas prices are partly a result of the states like Victoria locking up more than 40 years worth of conventional, unconventional gas reserves. In the Northern Territory, there's 180 years worth of gas reserves, again locked up by that government. So we are calling upon these state and territory governments to do what's in the national interest, to do what's in the interest of jobs and investment in their own states and territories, and remove these moratoriums and bans.
Do you worry, though, that they might say, look, you're asking us to do all of these sorts of things, but at the same time, you essentially are ruling out a major issue such as an emission intensity scheme, even though that might in fact be part of the Finkel report recommendations? Why should we do what you want to ask when you're not even adhering to potentially one of a key recommendations?
Well, let's just see what Finkel produces, but we are not going down the path of an emissions intensity scheme, and we've been consistent in those comments, because what that does is it punishes some of the thermal generation that we can't afford to lose from the system at this current time. You see, we've had 9 coal-fired power stations close in just the last 5 years, and as a result of the closure of Hazelwood and Northern, we've seen higher prices and a less stable system, particularly in South Australia. And the lack of preparation in South Australia by that government, by the Weatherall government, has been a real driver of the instability and the high prices in that state. They now have 47% of their power coming from wind and solar without the necessary backup, and so they were forced to rush out a package of measures just a few weeks ago. But really, that is too little too late, and we are now having to take control at the federal level to try to bring some stability back to the system and to drive prices and therefore jobs and investment in this country.
Josh Frydenberg, have to leave it there. Appreciate your time. Thank you.
Nice to be with you, James.